Lennon is a trained civil engineer, to be specific, and with a strong passion for farming and the arts. You're welcome, Lennon.
Right, thank you. It's good to be here.
Yeah, so...
Correction, the engineer part is not registered yet, so...
That's all?
That's all.
I'm not familiar with these things.
That's all right, that's all right.
But thanks for the correction, you know?
It's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Lennon, we are here to discuss a few things about this. We call this show the African Dilemma, because we believe that, because the dilemma is a kind of situation whereby, you know, there are many alternatives, but not all of them, most of them have their pros and cons. So you are there in the middle of which way, this way, that way,
Yes.
alternative route. So, yeah, and we shall be talking a lot more about the things in the coming weeks and months and even years.
Yes, definitely.
But for today's podcast, I was intrigued. I was reading about Africa. I came across a word, the dark continent. I was like, wow. I first heard about the term dark continent many years ago. And when they tried to explore this continent, for whatever reasons, they called this must be.
They are such a, I don't know if you want to call it, but they never... Nobody knew a lot about Africa, at least about North Africa, and I feel like they even knew about Kush. If you look at history about Kush, because I think Romans tried to invade in Kush, and Kush actually used to support Upper Egypt a lot, Lower Egypt rather. They never quite handled. They always had a way of making it look like this was all. But the history really says. And I've never quite understood why they really would bother to call us a dark continent.
500 years ago, and Egypt is part of Africa. It has always been part of this continent.
You know, but no, if you really think about how they looked at it, and maybe we need to think the time when they were coming, the imperialistic tendencies of the British Empire, and you kind of feel like the whole British Empire was the people that were coming literally did not, well, maybe for lack of a better word, the less refined group that were coming in. And so for me, I feel like the guys who were coming in always looked at, they didn't have the background to kind of understand maybe the history, the great history of Africa. And you feel like they maybe, and they obviously they had the feeling that they were coming in as this great nation, and of course they were the greatest nation at the time, and you kind of feel like they wanted to exert that power. And so if you look at it from their lens, maybe if the situation were reversed and we were the ones in their shoes, could we have done different? Could we have, if we were the ones who were going to Europe and we were the superpower and we didn't know much about Europe, wouldn't we have been the same? Isn't human nature a little bit similar in that I don't think Europeans are quite so different from us in terms of how we think and how we do things?
You know, the intriguing thing about all these things is that, so the Europeans come in Africa at a time when literacy was not there, and I mean in sub-Saharan Africa. They introduced literacy, let's face it. So that time information was passed on orally.
Yes.
You know, so by virtue of that, they wrote about the history of Africa. They wrote about activities in Africa.
Yes.
They were writing about themselves.
And you cannot, I think at some point I really disliked what I was reading about our history, because you kind of realize that it's not the history of the Africans, it's the history of the Europeans. I remember when I was like learning things, and at some point I wanted to just stop and I wanted to hear from not from to what to call my village, to kind of sit down with the older guys and hear their stories and hear how they handled life in. You should sit down with the really older guys who actually experienced colonialism. This is pre-independence, and you hear that time. And so it's an interesting thing, but that I think no human being is going to. They say that people who win wars are the ones who write history. No one is going to be able to accept, listen, reading someone else's history, because that history is not my history.
There is a saying, a proverb, an African proverb. I can't phrase it exactly as it is, but it's something like, unless the lion learns to write, the history will always glorify the hunter.
Yes.
Because the hunter can write. And he can tell us, you can tell us anything you want. Oh, I went to the forest. The animal, which was part of the story, because it cannot tell its story.
Yes.
You know, these people come, they create narratives about Africa, including the so-called this designation, the continent. Remember, these were explorers and colonizers. So the explorers write books and publish, and people were hungry for information about this so-called dark continent. Yes. And they would read and they're like, oh, wow, this is amazing. But they're reading things that are completely slanted in many cases.
I think the thing that you have to look at it is that these guys were always motivated by profit at the end of the day. Remember that any imperial sailing, you needed guarantors, you needed backers, you needed investors. So it was in their motive for them to create this narrative, because that's how you actually are able to get money out of your. Remember, this was a time when I think they were East Indian Ocean. I think East Indian Ocean.
that the first man to discover the source of the Nile was Greek.
I really can't reiterate more how I dislike how the history books. But like you said, the victors of war always write the stories. I think the bigger narrative for me I want to ask myself is this. Why was the interior not quite as open, not quite as known? Why did the interior look at mainly sub-Saharan Africa, why didn't it connect to North Africa, to the well-known North Africans who were really by that time I think were really I think Roman Empire was running it at the time of colonialism. Could have been Ottoman Empire, but there was definitely something there. So for me, the question is, why didn't the interior develop quite as fast as the coastal areas that were around? That's a bigger question to ask for ourselves, and even for us going forward as a continent. We still realize that our coast and the interior is still struggling to catch up. I think for me, those are some of the few things that for me I keep looking at and I keep wondering, how is it that Kush could have been supporting the Egyptian empire, but somehow Kush itself crumbled and just disintegrated and was left behind for a long time. My thinking kind of wonder how did that gap happen so fast? The Europeans came and found us at a time when I think, although we didn't have writings, we did so because it kept people the knowledge passed on was really kept well, and it was pristine. I think what happened is that when these people come in and you have an agenda to kingdoms, and for power you have to exchange technologies, you have to exchange maybe rights. Look at religion. As a religion, actually,
In order to show that they are civilized people, they had to live in people. These uncivilized people,
yes,
they need us. They need our help. Triple C mission, the colonizers, was number one. The second one was civilization and commerce. So those three. So Christianization and then civilization to change. It was about lifestyle.
Yes.
Okay. That cotton or linen something.
Yes.
And the cover, not a animal skin or hide. And they had to. At the end, they really succeeded. I think they really succeeded. Of course, it really depends on whether that was for the good or for the bad. We shall talk about that more. But yes, they changed things fundamentally. It took.
Yes.
But I don't know. These people must have been really sharp to them.
Yeah.
Just a small number of people come and subdue the people to cooperate without if
you have if the face that is telling you it has that if a face of your colonization looks like you, I suppose.
Alright. Okay, so far you're flowing so well. Now, Mr. Nathan, you got another man was there. We've lost sound for some good minutes.
We've lost some minutes.
Sound.
Sound.
Yes.
Wow.
You didn't know.
No, of course I've been fidgeting with it to go on. So
I'm going to African Dilemma. I am Nathan Kiwere, your host. I'm a writer and a publisher, and today I'm joined by a friend, colleague, Mr. Kagonyera Lennon.
Good to be here.
Lennon is an engineer, civil engineer to be specific, and is also passionate about farming and the arts. And so today we have an exciting topic about Africa. We've been looking about the continent and thinking about historical perspectives. But there's one particular thing that has intrigued us, and this is about the designation of Africa as a dark continent.
Yes, sir.
This history taught in our primary school, and why I find it intriguing personally is because Africa is the only designation of a dark continent. Not Africans themselves, but people who did not know about this dark continent, and then they taught us that our continent
Is a dark continent.
is a dark continent, and
In all ethical forms, it's not right. As in, how are you guys not taken to the ICC for calling us a dark continent? As in, it's ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous.
But they had their reasons.
They had their reasons, and you can't blame them fully. I think from that perspective,
A group of guys comes to Africa, 19th century, and they have
for some fame, try to get their name to something. I think that's what explorers really do.
to get information
Yes.
about a place and
Yeah.
maybe write about it and tell those who don't know about it. So during that time, I think explore
Big business.
business
That's big
to be
business.
specific.
That's big business.
So these guys were actually benefiting from this.
Yes.
How?
I think that the idea was to get funding for your expedition, and the funding was based on the premise that there was hope that you could get something in return with your journey back. So the whole reason for these people going on all these expeditions was to try and get something valuable that you could come back and resell and pay back your investors, and also you keep a profit for yourself. So it was a profitable business for them, and at the time it must have been very profitable.
I assume it must have been dangerous as well. You know?
Very. Who in this mindset, which investor would you go to right now? The only person you'd go to for.
They designated Mars as a dark planet.
Thank you. Why did it black? About Mars is that, and for some, I don't even think I know if it from my book, but there's some kind of red planet. So maybe they'll call it the red planet, the red continent, not the dark continent. But the dark continent thing is always also interesting, because if you're looking at it, Asia, Australia are all continents that I don't think these people knew anything about. If you look at it, if you look at the interior, if you look at how Asia is, if you believe National Geographic, it's jungle, it's humid, lots of rivers, dangerous rivers, lots of dangerous wild animals, lots of big snakes, lots of malaria. So you're thinking of it, you're looking at a continent that had an interior that was difficult to get into. Asia must have been more difficult than Africa. Australia, I don't know the history of Australia back then, but it must have been a desert as well. So one is a desert, so inhospitable. The other one is just difficult. I think if you're looking at Africa must have been the easiest of the three to get into. So you can't say that you're going to call Africa the dark continent simply because you have no information about it. I don't think that's right.
But I think the other problem in that kind of designation is generalization. When you say Africa is a dark continent, that's a sweeping statement.
Very sweeping statement.
You're talking about Africa from Egypt to the tip of South Africa, which is not entirely true, because for centuries, Europe was doing trade with it. Europe and Asia were doing trade with Africa.
Yes.
Taking minerals and slaves and all that stuff.
Yes.
Only to come of all times in the 19th century, and they say now it's a dark continent.
A dark continent. And it's interesting because if you look at history, you look at guys like, if you look at things, that amazing things, Egypt being the cradle of civilization, the fountain of knowledge in the library of Alexandria. If you look at the Romans having fought great wars with Carthage, Hannibal being one of, actually considered to be the greatest general tactician, military tactician of his time, maybe even of all. To the Romans, he actually crossed the Alps and which for a long time the Romans always had the thought that the Alps were their great wall, great wall to keep the enemy out. He found a way through, and he took the war to them, and Hannibal, although he's depicted as in some stories as a white man, he was actually known. It's known that he's actually a black man. So the black people who were known, they were known to be great fighters. Rome is known to have a history of having black been. So the dark continent, don't call us a dark continent because of our origins. That makes sense for me. And for me, there's nothing wrong with someone calling. There's nothing wrong with someone calling. That's like how a black man might call a white man pale.
Yeah.
Or very, 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 very light. Yeah. So for me, those are not issues of racism or anything of that sort.
But let's find out. Because the thing is, to date, there are people in the Western world who still think Africa is. In the West, think Africa is a country.
They still think we're running away from life.
It's strange.
It's very strange.
Ignorance.
It's
total ignorance. People have.
But I think for them, you have a particular country. You're going to know about your own country. I think we're the only ones who are with their lives in their other people's country, rather than figuring out what we need, what we are living in our own country. So the problem, I think, isn't theirs; it's ours.
How is that our problem? Come on.
Look at it this way: we how much do we even know about our own country? How we have about how many districts? Maybe now how many? 107 or something. So what were these districts? How many of us have gone through our own country, at least from east to west, south?
But what has that got to do with?
The thing is this: why would we study about someone else rather than your own country? If you're going to live here, in your own country, why bother thinking about someone else? Why are we studying the history of the Argentinians, of Europe,
in the syllabus,
of the Americas? It's really
but
rubbish.
I'm not sure I would call it rubbish, because knowledge for knowledge's sake is fine. The problem is if you don't teach about your own knowledge,
That's the biggest part.
Look, I had a stint teaching at the university at Makerere, history of art.
Yes.
And the whole history of art.
That's the challenge.
I thought this was wrong. That was completely wrong. So what that means is you bring out students who are very competent, skilled in European art, at the expense of their own art.
I think for me that's why you get companies like yours, like me, like CC Analytica that's supposed to kind of bring the perspective of Africa from Africans, is that the reality is the interior of Africa is still, and some of the things that clogged us from back in the day are still, unlike Europe, because like Europeans, you have water bodies that climb. We don't have those water bodies, and then we have no infrastructure going into the interior. Great jungles and undiscovered places.
Oh, we do. I mean,
You think we do?
Congo. When you talk of Africa not having infrastructure to penetrate the interior, I think you're really being generalistic. But because I know for sure there are African countries that have tried, But
Which ones
Congo,
tried them?
I mean Congo,
Which ones
South
have tried?
Africa.
South Africa has tried,
North
but
Africa.
South Africa has tried to an extent whereby you wonder how far it can go. I think to a general extent I can accept that, but it's not quite as blatantly.
There are people in Congo, DR Congo, who have never crossed to another province.
Yes.
For a lifetime.
Yes.
Someone is born in Kinshasa, someone is born in Goma, and the only form of transport is by air.
It's by air.
Yes, so they have several airports, but how many people can actually afford to travel by air? So you're a place and you live and die in that place without knowing what goes on in the rest of the world.
I think we have several challenges as a people. We have definitely have several challenges as a people. For me, connectivity is one of the biggest challenges. Us connecting to our fellow Africans. I think the AfCFTA, African Free Trade Continental Area, is that treaty should help us with a lot of the terms of at least duties and all that. But the main thing for me is that if I can find out that there is a demand for my products by my neighbors, why would I be bothering taking my products to the Europeans? I remember listening to one in-law of mine who told me that to not try and waste time looking beyond Africa for my goods. Look for my fellow Africans, because the standards that they have are almost like a form of protectionism for them.
Oh.
So it helps to keep goods out, or keep some countries out. So for me, I am more in my African people what we need, because now for me I feel like every time essential, but every time I'm dealing with Africans, everything we do is essential. It seems like it's really fundamental, very really basic.
Okay. Then I want to draw you back to the Dark Continent.
Yes.
So we were talking about how Europeans, so they come and a few of them succeed to penetrate the continent, and they write about it.
Yes.
Their experiences, of course, as you say, these were explorers who had a business mind to eat. They wanted to be famous, they wanted to make money out of it, so they were doing a job. So they wrote about Africa, and this information was picked by their fellow, countrymen and women back home, and that is what informed their narrative, what they know about. I have this person who has come on this continent for a few, and then they form an opinion that is going to become the creed. At that time were not literate. Their activities in Africa. It's like when I go to Europe and then I come back and write a book about my.
Do they write a bit about Asia as well?
I guess they did.
They must have.
Why not? The question is why not? I mean, if some of them succeeded to break into this, that I've read some books, by the way, about by some. There's a missionary, Uganda, a British missionary that came to Uganda. It's called John. Now I forget the other name.
Yes.
But he actually very detailed information about the Baganda. The book is called The Baganda. Yes. John Roscoe. John Roscoe, available in this country. Yeah. If you want to get a copy, you have to go to to London,
Wow.
go to other cities.
Wow.
And I think they were, to his credit, were able to capture some information. Whether it is completely true or half true, that is a different matter. That's a matter of
You're going to look at it and wonder. This guy John Roscoe goes and writes his books. I don't know if he actually made a lot of money from his books. So who was he targeting? Who was his target audience? I think for me the thing that for me I can appreciate about the Europeans is their propensity to write. They have a propensity to write about anything. I think if you told them to write about carpets, I'm sure there are very many books about carpets and how they are made and which regions they have. So the question is, if those people are saying that this was a dark continent, so where did that guy get that information from? So that he was observing. I don't think you can get all that information by just observation. So he must have had a source of that information. So if that information was there, then what were the sources that were there? How did he get it? And then the thing is that there must have been a method that was used for them for people to actually pass this information on through the timelines, through the generations. So for me, I think when these people come and claim that we're a dark continent, that the knowledge was not there. The knowledge was there. We had a system of doing things. We might have been backward in their eyes, and maybe rightly so. I'm not going to deny that part fully. However, we had a way of doing things that was effective for us, and we were not suffering. People think that I don't think. Actually, I've never seen it written that we were a country that was in poverty, that we had famine, we had hunger.
No, not at
We
all.
were not in chaos.
People had enough.
People had enough. People were living comfortably. People had an organized way of community. So we had kingdoms, we had chiefdoms. So yes, we had wars, but that was. But also the Europeans had wars in that time when they had kingdoms.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So
No doubt.
that's nothing new. So we were quite frankly all right. So if we were all right, then it means that there is a way that they, and for me I think the problem that we have with Europeans is the narrative that they created, where they made us look like we were in trouble. They could have come, but I think their method of working could have been a bit different. They could have come and, of course, they had the three C's. The the Christianization of Africa. They have civilization and commerce. I think they could have, without necessarily having a neo-colonialism mindset.
You know,
Yeah.
you know the agenda has changed.
Yes.
What is the person looking for? So when the people like John Speak come to countries like Uganda to explore,
Yes.
and then they take it upon themselves to also start naming physical features.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the biggest colonial mistakes of all time. Okay, and they even use the locals to go to access these places. Because I believe Speak, of course, he came looking for the place. He had the porters, he met chiefs, and he kept asking questions. Where is the source of, and they can't find it. And then he reaches the place, which has a name, a lake like Lake Nalubali, and then he renames it from today going forward. This will be called Lake Victoria. After Queen Victoria, I christened it, I baptized it.
Yeah.
And then the people, I don't know whether they agreed.
I think that,
Of course they did, because that's the only reason it's called Lake Victoria today. They say, show me another one. And this river, I don't think River Nile was named. He goes to another lake and say, this is Lake Edward.
And
I think those were brothers of the Queen.
Yes, I
and
think
the
George was
priests.
been a king. Yeah.
And then they do the same across Africa. I mean, they go to Zimbabwe, name Victoria. Can an African even risk you go there and rename the
No, I
State
think
House.
the problem that you
You
have.
go rename the State House.
Yeah. I think that change is the real challenge is the adoption of those names by the Africans themselves. You can go and name anything. If someone came and
what was the contract? Have you ever thought about it?
But that's
Tell this guy
interesting.
comes and like, this is Lake Victoria, and you're like, okay.
Why did they agree? No, seriously. If you think
And
about
then you
it,
announce
how did they
it.
agree?
From today onwards, gentlemen and ladies, this is Lake Victoria. Lake what? Victoria. Uh-huh.
Question is, how does a group of like maybe 200 people come and colonize 3-4 million people?
They probably were less than 200.
It must have been less than 200.
No, these guys had weapons. Of course, they had
Yeah.
firepower. I mean,
how?
some Africans had never heard of a gunshot. Now, when you discharge an ammunition from a piece of wood, I think people, you can subdue people like, people
It must
have
have
been
been the
given
goats.
to using raw power
They used
to
they
subdue.
They used raw power, but for me, I
They-
think at some point, I think you can understand before, but at the point when our people are now trading with them for guns, and now they could actually receive guns
Yes, they could have.
to become in charge of me.
Thank you. Now that is a bit more direct rule
Yes.
in East Africa. They used locals to govern locals, but they were the real power
Very
behind.
yes.
They were able to achieve their objectives, which was exploitation of resources
Yes.
and civilization. But the French were different. The French had the so-called policy of assimilation.
Mm.
And
They
the
took you
assimilation policy was such that this land belonged to you because you are strong enough to defend it.
Yes.
In the same token, it now belongs to us
Because
we are strong enough to
we
hold
told
it.
it.
Let he who is not satisfied come and fight us. Then they wait, anyone? We surrender. Thank you. Now, from today onwards, this is how we do it. This is how things pan out.
Yes.
And to date, I've been to West Africa, my God. I won't mention countries,
Yes.
but that legacy is still very strong.
Still very strong up to
Yes.
now. I
The
think-
French legacy in terms of their culinary, culture,
Yes.
dressing, architecture, it is French Africa, really,
It's French
really,
Africa.
and it hasn't dissipated. People are still like
They still have
relishing it
Yes,
in
they
ways
still
I
have
don't
this-
understand.
They said that Frances it's still called France
Yes.
and
the currency they give them
Yeah. yes, it's everything has its pros and cons. Everything has its pros and cons. I think there's a reason why they are struggling now. I think as Russia has come into. I really believe Russia has come to save these nations from the French agreements for independence, where they have really continued to exploit these countries in merciless. I think things was a lot more brutal than
the British.
Kept things a lot more civil, and the fact that they used indirect rule helped us a lot in terms of the numbers that were. Of course, we have tragedies like the Mau Mau in Kenya, which was very. Continent has its tragedies.
So in principle, we're saying that the notion fundamentally flawed.
Very flawed.
And
Extremely flawed.
It's only served the interest of those who found it, good to name it so. And someone said that probably it was also because of their imperialist ambitions. They wanted to find a justifiable ground to come in and liberate Africa. We shall talk more about that in our next episode.
Yes.
But before we sign off, maybe some fun facts. Something about Africa. Yeah.
I think a fun facts for Africa. You're looking at. First of all, I The Library of Alexandria was one of the was the largest library of the time before it got burnt down. I think intentionally, we claim. If we put on our tinfoil hats. And then we also know that at one time North Africa was fully Christian. The Byzantine reign was really fully Christian before the Ottoman Empire came in and made it Muslim. Actually, the Arabs. So North Africa wasn't necessarily occupied by Arabs before. They're relatively newcomers.
Okay. Wow. For me, I would go for Mali. I've been to Mali a few times.
Yes.
So I can talk about what I've seen as well. Timbuktu. The Timbuktu was a city in the Malian Empire, I think from 1200 AD,
Wow.
which was ruled by powerful kings.
Yes.
You know. But the thing about it is they had this kind of civilization that is contrary to what the so-called Dark Continent,
Yes.
propagandists, if I may call them,
Yes.
claim. You know, Timbuktu was a powerful. It was a major center of trade, culture, and learning.
And
You know, they had the university,
Yes.
the University of Sankore, which taught subjects like mathematics. They taught culture, of course, religion, Islamic religion, as well as astronomy.
Astronomy.
From that time,
Yes.
this was not by influence of the West.
Yeah,
This
yeah.
was indigenous knowledge.
Yes.
The mathematics was indigenous
Indigenous.
to the people. The astronomy
Yes.
was indigenous to the people.
Yes.
And then they also built, large, these were not and grass thatched mud and water.
Yes.
Of course, Sudanic Sahel architecture. Some of these, that building style, I've slept in some of them. And it looks, terracotta brown kind of thing with.
Yes.
You may not. What does it look like inside? Actually, inside is the proper
quite
house.
Yeah.
It's like you see.
So
this room.
they have a strong heritage.
Yes, they've kept that heritage, but for me, the fact that knowledge was, was espoused during that time, and from 1200 is quite powerful. Not to mention Mansa Musa, of course, one of the richest men that have walked this earth, probably the richest.
So are the Malians still quite strong on their education background?
They, yes and no. Of course, a lot of these things have, been destroyed along the, because of wars, conflict. A lot of it has gone down, very significantly, by the way. But the heritage is there; it's undeniable.
Yes.
So, when someone comes in the 19th century and talks about the Dark Continent without being mindful of some of these things that have existed, for so long, I think they're being disingenuous, and they are aware about these things.
Intentionally so.
Yeah. So thank you so much, Lennon. I think that's all we had for